still here then? Oh, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? It's weird, though, isn't it? Saying goodbye and leaving a situation can actually be really quite awkward. You know, I've got this thing, it feels like kind of social inertia. It's the tendency to act in a constant state unless acted on by an external influence. And so apologies to any of you whose parties I've been at and you've been trying to get rid of me at the end. But it's the same after a gig. You get to the end of the gig and the adrenaline's going and you have a beer and you just think, oh, I'd quite like to play some more music now. And but it's over. So it's a bit awkward, really. But I kind of wonder, you know, is that reluctance to say goodbye and to leave a situation, does it have some kind of, does it reflect some inner, I don't know, awkwardness and fear of the big goodbye? As in the end, the death. Let's name it. Let's call it death. We're not allowed to talk about it for some reason. It's this mad taboo that we can't talk about. But we're all heading for it. We're all heading that way, and it's part of life. It's got to be part of life. Without death, we wouldn't have life. But somehow we're really scared of it. And for me, excuse these guys. They just got to pack up, so yeah, we'll just let them get on with it. But you don't mind if I chat a bit, do you? I think we've got a few minutes till they kick us out. But yeah, I didn't really have to confront death until I was in my mid-20s. And it was an old school friend of mine. And the way I kind of dealt with it and made sense of it was that it felt to me like he was on another level. He was like he'd reached this kind of next plane and was ready to move on. It's like, you know, he'd won this level and he was moving up to the next one. And I genuinely felt like he'd lived in 25 years more than I'm likely to do in 90 if I'm lucky. So I'll give you an example of what he's like. We were at sixth form together, and this probably sounds stupid, but it's around that time when you start going to parties. And it was before the kind of dance explosion of the 80s and 90s. And it was at a time when you go to a party and the blokes would just be sort of stood around the edge sort of awkwardly with their beer like this and hoping to make eye contact with someone offensive. Or get drunk enough that you'd lose your inhibition. And all the girls were, you know, dance away, enjoying themselves. And then Alistair, my mate, was off in the corner. He'd be in his own little world, dancing away. And we used to go, you know. But actually, on the inside, I thought, that's pretty cool. If only I could have that lack of inhibition and just have the freedom to express myself in the way that he's doing. And it was genuinely like he was ahead of the curve. We finished school, he went on a scholarship to Iceland to study volcanic activity, and then he went travelling. He seemed to get around most of the planet, to the extent that a few years later I bumped into him in our local pub, and a friend of mine had just been told some awful news that he'd been diagnosed with a condition that his dad had died of in his early 40s. And his GP had said, well, I'm afraid you're probably going to live to a similar age. So he thought, well, if I'm getting a career, I'm just going to do a job for a little while and then go travelling. So I introduced him to my friend Alistair, and he decided that, my mate had decided that his dream was to hitchhike to Tibet. So I said, yeah, Alistair will know what to do. And sure enough, he didn't miss a beat, and he went, yeah, what you do is you go to Earl's Court, you find the Australians there, you buy yourself a camper van, you go down to Calais, get the ferry across, and then drive down through Gibraltar, and then you can go down through North Africa and miss this bit because there's a bit of a conflict zone there. And he had the whole thing in his head. It was like, from Little Sandhurst to Tibet. No problem at all. And so I was kind of in awe of this guy. And then years later, having not seen him for several years, I'd kind of started to find myself and realise what I wanted to do in my life. And I'd gone and studied music. And I was in my second year at college studying. And I'd been on this exchange programme. I'd been to America. And just come back from there. And in the local pub, it was around Christmas time, and there's my mate Alistair. And I said, oh, brilliant to see you. I said, I've just come back from the States. I've been studying there. And it came out with all this shit about America and how restrictive it is and how you can't drink until you're 21, but you can own a gun. Just lots of negative stuff. He came straight back at me and he went, oh yeah, I've just been to the South Pole, of course. I'm an astrophysicist now, of course. And he said, yeah, and there were loads of Americans there, and weren't they brilliant people? They were just so open and positive and go-getting, and he made me feel this big. And I just thought, That is the difference between us. He always saw the good in people. And he just didn't bother himself with any negativity. And so he was a real inspiration. But nonetheless, I felt like I was kind of starting to catch up with him, and I was saying, you must come and visit me in London and meet my mates there. And it felt like a really good time to be sort of rekindling this friendship. 2 weeks later, I got a telephone call. He'd been going to go skiing up in Scotland, hit some black ice, run off the road, and been killed in a nasty accident. And I didn't know what to do with that information. I was 24, 25. I'd not had anybody from my immediate world disappear before, and I really didn't quite know how to process that information. So I went along to the funeral, and by this point, we'd kind of, we'd moved on. There weren't any of our peer group around anymore, so I only really knew one person there, which was his sister, who I'd known at school. So me and my mate, actually the same mate he told how to get to Tibet, we kind of skulked into the back of the chapel, sat ourselves down. And there was one other person there that I did know. He was the local vicar. And I don't want to put a downer on anyone's religious beliefs or anything, but he was not a poster boy for the Church of England. He was like everybody's mental caricature. And he kind of was very pious, and he talked down to you, and there was no humanity or warmth about him. And he talked about Alistair like he'd never known him, whereas he'd been the local vicar in our primary school. He'd come into school all the time. Alistair's family had been regular churchgoers, and he just trotted out all this stuff, and I felt disappointed and a bit angry, to be honest. And he finished up, and then Alistair's sister stood up, and she started to read out some poetry, and it was what he'd written when he was at the South Pole, and it was all the stuff that he'd been telling me about when I'd seen him 2 weeks before. And I just broke. I just, floods of tears, and I was just sobbing my heart out at the back of the church. And I felt really awkward, which is crazy, because if you can't cry in a church at a funeral of one of your mates, then when can you? But I had all this kind of, awkward middle-class thing that, I felt like all these other people there were closer to him than me for some reason. They were his close family and friends, and they had their shit together, and I was the one losing it. So at the end of the thing, his mum said, come back to the house, we're having a wake, do come. I couldn't face it, and then me and my mate just went to the pub, and we had a couple of beers in Alistair's honour, which was stupid. I should have gone to the house, I should have surrounded myself with people that knew and loved him, and that would have been a really positive experience, but kind of didn't do it. What I did do was write a song. And I think, bloody hell, it's going fast. I'm going to use this microphone while it's still working. So this is my song for Alistair, who was an inspiration. And it doesn't really have a title, because I don't really have occasion to sing it very often, but we'll call it Every Day is an Adventure. It goes like this. Ice flows, polar sunrise, your words still come alive. Such beauty, truth and wisdom, but you were just 25. Oh, Alistair, where did you go? Alistair, what did you know? Alistair, where are you now? Alistair. The sorrow of leaving hurts much more than the icy cold, but you learnt your lesson well. So young, but then so old. Oh, Alistair, where did you go? Alistair, what did you know? Alistair, where are you now? Alistair. Every day is an adventure, that's what you used to say. like the sunrise in winter. Your life gets more beautiful each day. Life gets more beautiful each day. Here in the chapel, those empty words don't reach my ears, but then they read your poetry, and I just can't stop my tears. Oh, Alistair, where did you go? Alistair, what did you know? Alistair, where are you now? Alistair. Every day is an adventure, that's what you used to say. Like the sunrise in winter, your life gets more beautiful each day. Life gets more beautiful each day. Life gets more beautiful each day. Life gets more beautiful each day.